Hey, welcome to another edition of Intentional Conversation with Mike Sandlin. Thank you for joining us today. On Intentional Conversations, we seek to interview men's ministry leaders who help men grow spiritually and help leaders and pastors to reach the men in today's culture, discussing the issues that men face every day. This program is where a men's ministry leader interviews leaders in men's ministry. Hi, I'm your host, Mike Sandlin, and I thank you again for joining us. For the last few weeks, we've been speaking to men's ministry leaders, men who are leading men in a respective ministry, or even those who are leading men in their local churches. But I have, but as I asked in the previous weeks, I want to start by asking you: when someone says men's ministry, what do you think? What do you think is men's ministry? Do you think it's just a bunch of men who are getting together to eat? Is it a bunch of men that you look at as the church's men's club? What is your thoughts when you hear those words, men's ministry? Well, today I have as my guest Mark Lubbock. He is the CEO of Gulf South Men, a men's ministry that facilitates discipleship-making ministries with churches and men's organizations across the nation. Gulf South Men offers the best practice and resources and training, equipping events, and providing keynote speakers. And Mark is formerly served as a senior pastor for 15 years with the United Methodist Church, and now serves as a deployed staff with the General Commission of the United Methodist Men. He is also a regional field director with Promise Keepers and is a regional director with Iron Sharpens Iron. But if you ever talk to Mark, you will find that his most important job is being a husband to the wife of Vickie Lubbock. Buddy, I'm glad to have you on. Thank you for joining me, Mark.
I've been excited for this day to come here. Been looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, Mark and I have known each other for, 4 or 5 years now. We work together in Iron Sharpens Iron, really, and in respects, we have our connection that way. We'll talk about that here in a little while. But Mark, I want to ask you a couple of questions first as we get started, and let our listeners get to know you just a little bit better from a spiritual standpoint. But what is a verse that God may be using right now to speak into your life, or just a verse in general that you see from your ministry standpoint that is very significant as you ministering to men? I'll just let you share that for a minute.
My heart, from the moment I first read it and continues, is the entire book of Joshua, but in particular, the very first chapter and verse 7 through 9 really encapsulates my heart, where I am, and I believe the calling. And verse 7 starts out, "Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law that my servant Moses gave you. Don't turn from the left or the right, that you may be successful wherever you go." And it goes on to say, "Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you'll be prosperous and successful." And it wraps up, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid.
Amen.
Don't be discouraged, for your Lord, your God, will be with you wherever you go." And there are times in men's ministry when you've got to be strong and courageous, but always you've got to be Christ-centered. And it's just easy to pick up the bait and the temptation to pursue something that really isn't of Christ. It seems important, but it's a side trail. So anyhow, I keep that scripture in front of me. It's actually on my screen, and that's part of my daily prayer regimen.
Oh yeah, I mean, Joshua, you see those words several times about be strong and courageous, and we need to be, as men, we need to be in that mode all the time. And the only way we can do that is doing what Joshua 1:8 says, and that is, don't let the word depart from your mouth, but meditate on it day and night. Thank you for sharing that. Well, Mark, I got to ask you this question. I know I've, like I told our audience in our introduction, is that I've known you for a while. But one thing I don't know about you is how in the world did God get you into ministering to men? I don't think you'll disagree with me that ministering men is one of the hardest jobs you can do in the church. And a lot of leaders in the church will shy away from that because it is so difficult. So how did God get you into ministering to men?
Well, it was really through a personal need and a personal journey. I joined the church at a point in my life when I was struggling. But I was coming to the church as a what I'd call a typical guy, who's unchurched. So I didn't really know anything about Jesus. I just knew that the church was a place that probably had some good moral values. I could probably get away, if you look at it from a school perspective, by being a D student. So I didn't have to be an A student and keep all the rules that I saw in the church. So I came into it from that perspective. What I wanted to do was fix the problems in my life. I didn't see the answers, though, in the church. Heard great sermons. They had really great people. But when I looked at what the church offered, for me, as at that moment, a man going through a divorce and struggling with a career, I wasn't finding answers. Along that same time came Promise Keepers. And at that time, they talked about some standards that appealed to me. Learning how to keep your promises, learning how to be a godly man, learning how to be a good husband, a good son, a good father, a good brother. Those things really appealed to me. So I looked into Promise Keepers, and they in turn connected me to tools and resources that were biblically founded that answered problems with relationships. It answered problems with integrity. It helped me understand how to apply the Bible as a man to my personal needs. And so I began men's ministry as a student and a participant. Something kind of surprising happened a couple of years into the process. We formed small groups, still meet with them today, almost 30 years later now. And in there, I heard a call from God to serve. I was happy to do that. Thought it'd be as a layperson, maybe as a men's guy or some area in the church. But the call really began to focus on becoming a pastor. And that later became affirmed. I went through a year-long discernment process and became a pastor, and I loved it. And I pastored for 15 years. But I got a wake-up call. Man in the Mirror offered a survey, a self-assessment survey one day to determine how effective we are in making disciples. And it asked 8 questions that assessed how well I was doing as a pastor, we were doing as a church, in reaching men, connecting them to Jesus, and helping them grow. When I looked at the men in my church, I had great guys, always had great guys, few of them, but great guys. But the only men who were changing, transforming, were the ones I was personally meeting with once a week. The others were exactly the same they were 20 years ago. Their household didn't reflect a Bible-centered, Christ-centered lifestyle. Good people, but Jesus clearly wasn't the standard they were living up to. And I didn't know how to do that. So I started looking. I thought there must be resources here as a pastor that I'm just not taking advantage of. And I was shocked and surprised to find that systemically, denominationally, and through our seminaries, there is nothing. There are general tools and resources on how to do sermons, how to study, how to structure and organize a church, how to embrace certain ministries, but nothing that showed the urgent need to connect men to Jesus or how to do it. That in turn helped me hear the next call, which is to step out of the pulpit and to address this issue as a parachurch ministry. And out of that was birthed Gulf South Men, which I am the CEO of and the founder of. So that's kind of the short version of how I got into men's ministry. It was identifying a personal need and then a church-wide need to identify resources, and then where it's welcome to help churches connect the men there to those resources.
You know, you made an interesting statement in your explanation of how God moves you into this ministry. You as a pastor recognized your own personal need of something a little bit more deeper and systemic as far as your relationship and diving into the Word. Even though you had the schooling, you had the training, and so forth in the seminaries. Do you think that's the case with a lot of our pastors that we speak to and we have connections with, that they fully don't understand the what is actually going on in a man's heart and in a man's life, that he needs that other man in his life to pour into him as a brother disciple in Christ?
You know, one of the things I've learned is most of the clergy that I've encountered are dedicated, sold out people
Oh
who
yeah.
are
Oh yeah.
sacrificing.
Absolutely.
And it's a
Absolutely.
matter of connecting the dots. I'm not aware of any seminary or really any denomination or church affinity group that teaches the why.
Mhm.
And because of that, men are lumped in together as the church, and
Mhm.
pastors don't see a need or even any benefit in doing something focused on men. So it's not an unwillingness, it's an unawareness. And we don't teach the outcome based measurement. What we teach as a church here in the Western world is that if you do nice things for the family and you meet some of the needs, you're doing the work of Christ. All churches want to make disciples. All pastors want to make disciples, and they're trying so hard. What's missing is a way of assessing the effectiveness and the outcome. And so I discovered that. I've also discovered that most men don't come banging on the pastor's door saying, I need a men's ministry. The ladies will do that. The parents for their children will do that. And other special groups will. As a group, men don't do that. So
Mhm.
the pastors are just not aware. I find some aren't terribly receptive to the idea because they see focusing on men as empowering men to become dominant. And they're not seeing it as a person who influences culture, family, and society. They're seeing it as creating an elite group that now has power that will not be managed properly.
Yeah.
Now, that's not all pastors, clearly, and it may even be the significant segment, but I found that some resist men's ministry for that reason. There are some people also in the clergy that have been hurt deeply by men who were, quote, leaders in the church, who were, their family was hurt, their ministry was hurt. We've had a large number of pastors chased out of churches by men's leaders who had a personal agenda. The net result then is that the clergy are either unaware or a little bit reluctant to embrace this, and they don't see a benefit from that. So one of the things that I try to do is start with the why and the outcome. And of course, we all know the Great Commission doesn't segment people, nor does it exclude. So when you look at the outcome of the average church, the largest absent group happens to be men.
Yeah.
Most churches program for children, many do for elderly. The ladies tend to do a very good job of programming for the needs of the women. And as I said, the men, talking for myself now, I was prideful. I was afraid to let people know where I was failing. I was ashamed, and I was scared that when people knew how inadequate I happened to be in managing my own spiritual life, that I would somehow be segregated and isolated as somebody unworthy of the rest of the church. So I didn't tell anybody. I put on a strong, confident front. There's a song that kind of addresses that, I say I'm okay, but I'm not. I'm broken.
Yep. Yep.
And boy, that was me.
Yep. Yep. We our conference has a tendency of taking our pastors and put them up on a pedestal a little bit as almost to the point of being like a sinless pastor, so to speak. He didn't have any problems, and they don't realize that really the pastors are no different than they are.
That's right.
They've just been God just called them to a different type of ministry than what they are setting in our churches. And so we have to understand the needs of our pastors as a human being. Also, they struggle with it.
Amen.
One of the things I have, let me throw this out to you. I know that I have sat in a room full of pastors and in the Baptist world, because I come from the Baptist world, but that never mind, it's just semantics. But I've sat in a room full of pastors, and I've made this statement. I said, we have done an excellent job of getting our men, of putting their hands to work, and things like disaster relief, wheelchair ramps, and building those kinds of stuff. And they go out there and they really do it. But I have to say that we've done an equally poor job of speaking into their lives to help them to grow in Christ. What would you say to me if I said that to you? which I just did.
Well, as someone who's interested in doing a better job, I'd be receptive, but as a pastor, I'd probably be a little defensive, be honest with you, because pastors tend to feel inadequate to the job, no matter what they say or do. They tend to feel that way. But I would agree with everything you just said. More than that, I've done a great deal of research over the past 20 years. I've looked at government studies. I've looked at university studies. I've looked at Barna and Gallup studies that assess the quality of life based on a lot of factors and what are the influencing factors. And it assesses both good quality life and bad quality life. More importantly, this research focuses on outcomes and how to influence the outcomes. Now, I'll make a little sense out of all of that. If I were to summarize it using statistics, by the way, this is empirical data, publicly available. So it's not something that's spun or twisted to fit my agenda. It's just out there and anybody can access it. When you look at the behavior of men, they have a very significant impact and influence on every aspect of society. Obviously, we've got the Me Too movement where bad behaving men have hurt a lot of people. But let me break it down a little closer to home. The studies have shown if in the household a man is present, then the outcome for any children in that household improve measurably. Whether he's engaged with them or not, just having a man in the household makes a positive difference.
Oh,
now, if he's absent, he's gone, and he's the missing element, the outcome for kids is worse. Now, take it a step further. If he happens to be married to their mother and in the house, again, things improve. And I'll give you some specifics here in a minute. If he is in the house, married to the mother, and he's a caring, engaged father, not perfect, but he takes interest in the kids and his wife and in the household and gives them time, just time and attention, the outcomes are phenomenally improved. Now, here are the outcomes I'm talking about. Literacy. The children are less likely to be literate, more likely to be illiterate if dad's not present. The outcome socially is horrific if dad's not present. The kids are more likely to engage in sex as a teen or preteen, more likely to have a sexually transmitted disease, more likely to have a child out of wedlock as a teen, less likely to get married. If they marry, they're less likely to stay married. They're less likely to do well in school. Most won't graduate high school. They're much less likely to go on to secondary education. They're more likely to become incarcerated, significantly more likely to become incarcerated. They're more likely to suffer from an addiction of some sort that impacts the family negatively. They're also less likely to be healthy long-term, and they're less likely to earn a good income if dad's not there. Now, when dad is there and he's engaged in a positive way, those things turn around in a radical and wonderful way. The outcome then, if these kids aren't doing drugs, having sex, being single parents with dad not present, the outcome is a great benefit to not only society, because crime's reduced, you have more literate people, you have better workers, but families start to be functional and fruitful, developing other healthy families. And this is all empirical data. So with that data in place, every church then ought to be highly motivated to make certain that dad's included. See, men are excluded, not by design, but by process. They are excluded from most disciple-making processes. There are Bible studies, there's Sunday school classes, there are courses, but there's no prescribed process that reaches men with a good outcome. And I say that because as churches assess their outcomes and they look at how daddy behaves outside of that 1 hour at church a week, he looks a whole lot like his next door neighbor. Divorce rates are similar. All the other negative indicators are very similar to unchurched people when you measure men. So that's kind of the upshot. Going back to your question about clergy and pastors and their awareness, they're not taught this. And it's really not been a focus of any government. There's some agencies that recognize this, but most are patching the symptom of men who don't know
Absolutely.
Jesus.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I couldn't help but think of two things when you were talking about that and talking about the ministries that are generally most prevalent in our churches with the women's and the children's. I remember a mutual friend of ours who has gone on to be with the Lord now, but Jeff Kasiah, Coach K, he showed me a picture one time of when he was visiting a church, and I won't say where it was at, but when he was doing a walkthrough on the campus, and he came across this table that had three baskets on it with brochures on it, and you had a brochure for women's ministry, a brochure for youth ministry, and a brochure for children's ministry. And he said, "What's missing from this picture?" And that's true for a lot of our churches. The other thing that you spoke of there was the fact of engaging. A dad is in the home that is engaging. You know, we've got those statistics of how many children are growing up in fatherless homes, but we really don't know how many children are growing up in homes where the dad is there but is not engaged. And
Good
it's
point.
in essence, it's still a fatherless home in a lot of ways. And that's a key point of helping our dads to be engaged. And I appreciate you sharing all of that. Let me ask you this. I want us to get into some of our ministry opportunities that you are heavily involved in. I know you shared a little bit about Gulf South Men, about a little bit of how it came about, but share a little bit more of the mission and the purpose of Gulf South Men so our listeners can understand how they can tap into you and access a lot of your resources that you have through your ministry.
Well, as I mentioned, that as a pastor, I wasn't identifying any resources that I could use for the men in my church. And it wasn't because they weren't necessarily out there. I just didn't have any way of identifying and finding them. Gulf South Men specializes in identifying best practice. In other words, these are things that work. And these are tools like training tools, studies, resources, helps, counseling, and coaching. And we make this available to interested churches. Not every church is ready to tackle this. They have other things that need to be a priority properly. But those that are ready for it will come alongside the church and will help them craft a custom plan and process to meet the need that they've identified at the moment. And so that might be several engagements. It might be a holistic process where we're helping them craft a front to back discipling process. Sometimes we'll go in and we'll simply facilitate the formation of a small group or beginning of a ministry that meets men where they are. Other times we'll provide specific resources addressing needs like pornography or widowers, whatever the specific need might be. Young men who have a new family, they're trying to build a career and somehow survive in marriage. You know, what do you have in the church to meet that particular need? We'll identify that, bring it to the church, and we'll either train somebody there to facilitate it or we'll do it ourselves. In addition, going back to best practice, we look for ways that can excite and motivate men. That connects us to the other ministries. Iron Sharpens Iron is an equipping ministry whose client really is the church. The intent there is to build into the men and send them back to the church aware and equipped with new resources that they can share. Likewise, Promise Keepers fills a very vital void. They have a dynamic experience, a group experience that helps men feel confident that they can do this. It gives them a burning desire to grow spiritually, and it gives them the sense that they are not alone, that their struggles are common to all other men. So Gulf South Men looks for resources like this and ways to connect. We help local governments. We work through police departments, through state governments, et cetera, to help provide spiritual support for leaders and to provide resources for those that want that. That includes prisons and a variety of other ministries wherever men happen to be.
Oh, that's wild, and that you go. And I know that you're reaching out not just in the Louisiana area where you're physically located, but I know your logo covers 3 or 4 states on either side of you: Texas, Mississippi, Alabama, and things of that nature. But you're reaching out beyond that now these days, aren't you?
You know, it's the prayer of Jabez. God has expanded and broadened our territories, and we actually have a footprint and a presence now in uh, both coasts of the United States and a couple other continents, a couple other countries, and we really go where the need is. And of course, we submit it to prayer. The need's everywhere, and we try to discern where God would have us serve. But yes, we've been helping people in quite a few other countries and all across the United States.
Yeah. How long has Gulf South Men been in existence again?
We were formed in 2008
Okay.
and been around since then. So,
So that's about 13 years ago. And,
yeah, we got a few years under our belt, and we're in the process of growing. We're developing resources where we don't find uh, just the right resource. We're developing it ourselves. So we're in the process now of creating a new video series that addresses the next great generation, and how do you pour into the next great generation and equip them, help them avoid all the mistakes that I made, for example. So we've got a really great training video resource and a study guide that we're creating for that, and some online courses, and we do that all throughout.
Yeah, well, I'll be interested in seeing that, because that's a big question I get a lot of times. And so, what do we do for the next generation? And our culture has changed so much just in the last few years. The last 4 or 5 years, it's changed so much and so drastically. And in the information, I know I heard a pastor recently talk about, somebody was saying something to them about, what am I going to do about the millennials? And he says, what do you mean? What are you going to do about it? You're the one that raised them. So, so
That's right.
you're going to have to sit back and help figure that out. How we're going to minister to this generation that is coming up. Well, Mark, you mentioned something else too, and Gulf South Men is involved in, and you mentioned a little bit in your intro about how you got into men's ministry, and that's Iron Sharpens Iron. Both of us are very actively involved with Brian Doyle and Iron Sharpens Iron. Speak to us a little bit about how Iron Sharpens Iron from a Gulf South Men standpoint. Where all do you reach in that area, and are you doing any conferences this year? I know a lot of our brothers are foregoing that this year, but are you doing anything in that area also this year?
We're actually in the planning stages of doing an event in Texas and another here in Louisiana. And we've got several planned for next year, a little bit of a broader footprint, actually considerably larger footprint for next year. Mm-hmm. Iron Sharpens Iron fills a vital need. And the beauty of it is they do the work for the local church. Think about this. The average church now is under 100 members. They don't have generally any budget whatever for men's ministry. Yeah, in fact, right. I can tell you that every time I ask a church for their top budget items outside of building and salaries, men never show up on the top of the list.
We actually, a lot of churches don't even have them as a line item in their budget.
They don't. Most do not have anything in there for men, whatever. Yeah. And so if you want to reach your men and equip as a church, you don't have the money to do that. Iron Sharpens Iron brings in world-class, highly gifted speakers, but also world-class resources and tools that help equip not only the men of the local church, but the local church itself to be effective. And the thing I like best about that is it is not only is it the largest conference men's network in the nation, but they have connections. And so they can bring in just the right skill and need. You've got men that are struggling with frustration and anger and don't know what to do about it. You have people hurt and wounded and have forgiveness issues and don't know what to do about it. Pornography is the greatest evil plaguing men right now, and almost no church has a tool for that. So Iron Sharpens Iron, again, identifying best practices, brings in world-class ministry partners to share their expertise. And so the men who come to Iron Sharpens Iron go back to their church informed and aware of a vital tool that they can make use of. I love it for that. It also motivates the men. It's a catalytic event. And here's the thing that I like best about it. It builds a team of men who are on fire for Jesus, motivated and equipped to serve in the local church overnight. In one day, if a church brings the men to this event, these guys will go back as a solid team who are ready to do whatever the pastor and the church want them to do. They're ready to grow personally, but they're much more ready to take it beyond that and to help others grow and come along with them on the journey. I love Iron Sharpens Iron for that reason. It's effective, it's proven, and it's world class.
Amen. I agree with that. And you were speaking to men just to let our listening audiences know we're not just talking about like the 30s and the 40s. We're talking about men who are still in their teenage years, getting ready to move into that adulthood. That Iron Sharpens Iron provides those kind of speakers to speak into what we call the emerging men, all the way up to our seasoned men who are retired and are still being used by God in so many areas. I know I do a breakout session and from time to time called "You've Retired, Your Ministry's Just Begun," and so many of our men today. So it reaches to just all levels of men. It doesn't matter your age. It doesn't matter where you stand socially, economically, or any kind of stuff. It just pours into your life. So you can go back to church, and it's something that's perpetual. You know, it will keep you going because it'll give you those tools to do that. Thank you for sharing. That's such a great word. And usually we need to say, take what you just said and package it up and send it out as our announcements to our area churches about what's going on with Iron Sharpens Iron. Thank you for saying that, Mark.
You know, Mike, you raised a good point that's worth illustrating here. And when we talk about men's ministry, it sounds exclusive, like it leaves out women. But really what you've discussed here is the inclusiveness of men's ministry. Men's ministry properly done includes the entire church.
Absolutely.
And not just the men. The men
Absolutely.
go back and become servants and supporters of all of the church ministry. It's actually the tide that raises all ships. And as you point out, it does include men of all ages.
Absolutely. It truly does. A man who truly gets his position that God created and designed him to be will actually speak into his wife's life and to women in general in ways like she has never felt before. And it is amazing how God designed us. Let's talk about something else that you're heavily involved in. And it's a big event that's coming up this July. I know that it was hoped to be done last year live, and it wasn't able to be done so because of the pandemic. But that is Promise Keepers. A lot of men who grew up in the 80s and 90s knows about Promise Keepers, and was kind of disappointed when it kind of went away about 2000, at least the large stadium meetings. And now it's coming back. And you are one of the regional directors in that. And speak to that. Tell us about that, and how can we get connected with the Promise Keepers movement that's going on right now.
Absolutely. And you said the right word. It is a movement, and it's a movement of God. It's not of man. It's not a good idea that somebody came up with or somebody trying to hang on to the past. Mm-hmm. Promise Keepers has been around for over 25 years, approaching 30 years now. Mm-hmm. They really hit the mainstream 1993. Were birthed in 91, 92, but 93 they started doing the stadium events. And they learned that men were ready and interested in a catalytic event that equipped them, that not merely served as a rally and made them feel good, but it sent them back home on fire, ready, willing, and eager to become men who keep their promises. Over my shoulder here, I've got a sticker that says, "I love my wife." Yeah. And I learned that from Promise Keepers, and I learned what it looks like. I learned how to love my wife. I learned how to identify the things in her that were different from me that I should value and I should treasure. Promise Keepers offers a connection not only to a catalytic experience for men that sets them on fire and makes them ready to charge forward, but it has a tremendous amount of good fruit. Over 8 million men attended the Promise Keeper events, and most of the men presently serving as men's leaders today were impacted in a very positive way by Promise Keepers. They were equipped by Promise Keepers. Actually, I trace all of my spiritual roots back to an awakening that Promise Keepers lit in my soul. Beyond that, their goal from this point forward is to do once a year in a major sports arena or sports stadium a catalytic men's event. And by that, I mean it's something that will get men engaged, focused on their own spiritual growth and their needs, and get them excited and committed to go back to their local church and do something about it. And it's highly, highly successful. It's a dynamic that if anybody's been to a large event of any kind, be it a sporting event or a music event or something of that nature, there's a dynamic in that group that takes place that even sociologists have identified and pointed out as being tremendously impactful. Think about when it's the Holy Spirit at the center of that. And this is men of all different religious backgrounds and all different people groups, all different economic groups, all coming together, catching that fire and going back home, ready to change, and generally to get into fellowship with other like-minded men to get that journey started. Promise Keepers is doing a major event this year in Dallas at the AT&T Stadium. This is taking place on July 16th and 17th, and we've just been given the go-ahead to have at least 80,000 men there.
Wow. What's that stadium hold? Do you know
It'll hold 100,000+. And they've actually given us permission to open the entire stadium up. Typically, we'll put a stage at one end of the stadium, close the back of it off just out of courtesy for guys. But they've given us permission to use the whole facility. And they've been very good to work with. And I really believe that's the fingerprints of God. When we were unable to do a live event due to laws and restrictions from the COVID, they were gracious enough to allow us to not only cancel that event, but to reschedule the following year at about the same time. And I really believe that was God's favor. Beyond that, this is a beautiful facility. It's an easy access location. Dallas is easy to get to, fly in if you need to fly. It's a reasonable drive for quite a few areas there. And what's going to happen there in a day and a half is men are going to be exposed to a variety of different speakers on very specific topics that are relative to what we're experiencing today. The cancel culture, the tremendous back pressure against religion. I'm not a fan of religion. I love Jesus. I'm not a fan of man-made religion.
There is a big difference between a relationship with Jesus and dealing with religion. Big difference.
Amen. And the guys are going to come back. Anybody that travels with another guy is going to come back with a lifelong buddy. I still do life today with the men that I started out with in Promise Keepers. We're still in small groups. I just attended a wedding this weekend where most of the men there I met through a Promise Keeper experience, and we began our personal spiritual journey through there. So for any pastor that wants to build his church quickly, this is a phenomenal opportunity. And Promise Keepers is eager to help them. We do have scholarships available. We have some programs available that offer group discounts, and we want to get men there as a group. Beyond that, for those who just simply can't do that, we offer simulcast. It's a phenomenal opportunity at a very low cost. Anybody with an internet and a sound system can be a simulcast partner. You could even conceivably do it in a rented hall or a hotel room, anywhere really that you have the facility. And for $99, you register. Now, the beauty of this is we're going to ask each man to register for two reasons. There's a significant cost in overhead, but most importantly, if men don't have a little skin in the game, they tend not to show up and to have any value attached. Now, the cost is very low for simulcast. It's $20 a head. And here's the beauty of it. The host church or organization will be rebated half of that back at the end of the event. So they just simply need to register their men. Everybody pays $20. The church pays $99. They have this available over the internet. They can stream it at their convenience, irrespective of their time zone. They can start it. They can stop it. They can take a lunch break, etc. So they have a lot of flexibility for that. We really want men to get the live in-person experience. Understand there's some that won't work for.
Yep. And I'll tell you, for me, where I'm based out of, which is just north of Wilmington, North Carolina, Wilmington has a direct flight to Dallas right out of the ILM here in Wilmington. So there's don't have to worry about layovers and all that kind of stuff when you're flying out and flying back. So that's just a plug there for our guys in the Southeast North Carolina area. And Mark, is great. We're coming up on our time, Mark, and we talked about a lot of things here today, and about how Gulf South Men is engaged with churches and helping them to develop their men's ministries. Iron Sharpens Iron, how that is tapped into to help churches to really see the resources that are available to our men, and how you and your ministry with Gulf South Men is utilizing that to help churches to see that. And of course, Promise Keepers, the big event this summer in July. I believe I always want to say the 14th, but it's the 16th and 17th, isn't it? And,
that's right.
With Promise Keepers and all that. But I wanted to, in lieu of all of that we discussed, and we discussed even getting into the heart of a pastor, and the desires of a pastor, and how he really wants his men to grow in Christ, but sometimes he struggles with how that should come about. What is one thing? I want to give you a couple of minutes just to talk about anything that's on your heart about as you speak into lives of men, lives of men's leaders, and even pastors, as you as a pastor yourself. Just give you a couple minutes just to share anything that you may feel like God wants you to share to our listening audience regarding all of that.
One of the things that I mentioned earlier is that pastors sometimes are threatened by men. The flip side of that is very significant. A group of godly men who are dedicated to supporting the mission of the pastor can have the back of the pastor, can be a backbone, spiritual backbone, not just to lift up furniture, but to be prayer warriors and to be there to help the pastor in his mission. And the only way that will come to pass is if the pastor pours back into the men and allows them the freedom to grow. I strongly encourage every pastor to do that. We did that at the church where I first came to Jesus. We formed a men's group who would get together to not just support the pastor in prayer, but to be a confidant, a trusted confidant. Very few pastors have anybody they can trust, and sadly, least of all the men in the church. And so we provided godly men who would pray for the pastors and be there to serve the needs of the church. Even went so far as to arrive there at 6 a.m. just to pray over each pew for an experience for everybody that might sit there through the 5 services. So I would encourage pastors to strongly consider building into their men in this way, and men to support their pastor, to not come up and demand. It's so rare that a man comes up to a pastor and says, "What can I do for you today?" We offered free weekends for the pastor and their entire family where we paid for it, and we picked up the slack when they were gone. And it wasn't to get them out of the pulpit, it was to give them a life and a balance. And we filled in where needed to help support the needs of the church as they arose during emergencies. We were a reliable group of people, spiritually founded. I think every church will benefit from that.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you sharing all of that. Well, Mark, I appreciate you being on with us. And for our listening audience, if you want to know more about Gulf South Men, you can go to gulfsouthmen.org, and you can find out all the information you need to know about Mark and his ministry. If you want to reach out to Mark himself, he's given me permission to put up his email there, which is Marko, Marko at gulfsouthmen.org, and you can reach out to him, and I'm sure Mark would be glad to reach back to you and speak to you about anything dealing with men's ministry, or even just having a relationship with Jesus Christ himself. And so it's pretty important. Mark, I do appreciate you being on the podcast today. It's been a great honor. I always enjoy talking with you. And maybe soon we can have one of our ISI leadership meetings again at some location where we can get all of our ISI guys together again and just have a good time of fellowship and learning from each other. But then anyway, that's great. If you want to know more about CapeFearMen.net, Cape Fear Men Ministry, just go reach out to CapeFearMen.net, and you can find out about us. You can reach out to me and Mike.Sandlin at united-men.net. I'm getting tongue-tied here at the end of the day. I don't know why. But at any rate, guys, you Sandlin at capefearmen.net. It's been great having Mark Lubbock on for us today. And if you have any more questions for us, just reach out to Mark. He'll be glad to have one. I hope you will join us again next time on Intentional Conversations with Mike Sandlin. And as an old friend of Mark and I used to say all the time, when he finished praying over us, he'd say this blessing to us. He said, I pray that God will give you a rock to stand on, a brook to drink from, and a tree to shade you by. God bless you, and we'll see you next time on Intentional Conversations with Mike Sandlin. God bless you.